Hello and welcome to this video about the trends that we've been finding out at NFP Synergy recently about what's happening with volunteering. We hope it's not going to take more than 5 or 6 minutes to tell you some of the key and interesting things that are going on. And the big points to notice are that really volunteering rates have stayed very stable since 2012, and there's little change by gender or social class. And indeed, there's little change by whether people are donors or not. The big change, by far the biggest change, is that age is the determinant of volunteering patterns, and that we've seen some really quite dramatic changes over the last 8 years. And there are two in particular to notice. First of all is that volunteering amongst the under 35s has increased by over 50% since 2012. And second, and perhaps more surprising, is that volunteering amongst the over 55s has halved since 2012. So let's look at these trends in a bit more detail. Well, if you look at what's happening in the overall trend, you can see we started at 22% in 2012 and we finished at 20% in May 2020. Really very little change at all. But as I said earlier, it's the changes by age that are particularly dramatic. What this chart shows is the demographics of different age groups with the overall at 20%. How do they differ by gender, by social class, by age, and by whether people have given or not? Well, what you can see here is there's not much difference between men and women. There's not much difference by whether people give or don't give. More people who give also volunteer, and less people who don't give. But there aren't many changes, as we'll see in a moment. It's the changes by age that are important. We're now up to 40% of people who are 16 to 24 saying they've volunteered in the last 3 months. But perhaps much more surprising than that from our recent trends is we're seeing as little as 7% of the 55 to 64-year-olds have volunteered in the last 3 months, and 13% of the over 65s. What happens then if we go back and look over the years to see how those changes have gone differently? Well, here you are with the figures as they were in 2012. We then add to those the figures from 2018, and then we add to those the figures from 2020. And you begin to see the stark contrast by age in recent years. So, not much difference in the overall trend, not much difference in gender, not much difference in social class, not much difference in whether people have given or not. But here you are, back in 2012, around the time of the Olympics, 24% of 16 to 24-year-olds had volunteered in the last 3 months. And now we're up to 40%. And you can also see, of the 25 to 34-year-olds, we were at 19%, and we're now up to 27%. But equally dramatic, but perhaps more surprising, is that of the over 55s, the 55 to 64 and the 65-year-olds, we've dropped from 22% volunteering, pretty much the same level as the 16 to 24s, and it's down to 7% in the most recent chart that we did in May. But also, we've seen a dramatic drop, particularly in the last wave, almost certainly because of the pandemic, for the over 65s. So what's going on here if we look at this over time? Well, first of all, what you can see in this chart looking at the age bands since 2012 is that the 16 to 24-year-olds have seen, with the addition of this trend line, going from 21% to 40%. And of course, there are many ups and downs. This seems to be quite a seasonal thing, young people volunteering much more in the summer than the winter months, but the trend is undoubtedly upwards. If we then add in the other age groups, you can see that there isn't a lot of change, relatively speaking, for those by comparison. But if we then add in the older age groups, you can see in this fantastic lime green that we've put in here, that we went in fact from 26% of the 55 to 64-year-olds volunteering back in 2012, and we're now down to 7%. But the key point perhaps is that even without this most recent point of 7%, almost certainly that far down because of the pandemic, what you can see is that the trend is still downwards. So why might these changes be happening? Well, the first thing to say is that youth volunteering is probably increasing because schools and universities are encouraging volunteering quite dramatically in a number of cases. It's a key part of filling in your UCAS statement. It's a key part in getting experience on your CV. And it's also an increasingly important route to securing a place at university or for a paid job. For older people, I think we'd have to say the reasons are less clear. In our most recent wave of research, the decline is probably attributable to lockdown and older age groups being unable to volunteer. However, that doesn't explain why 55 to 64-year-olds have gone from volunteering rate around 20% in 2012 to more typically 12 to 13% in the last couple of years before the most recent stat we have for the pandemic. We hope you found this trend overall useful. We're going to be producing a number of other trends in the next few months, looking at trust, looking at donations, looking at some of the political changes we've seen. But we've started with this one on volunteering, partly because it's particularly relevant for what's happening with the pandemic, but also because there's so much that's going on that is a big change in the age bands that we thought people wanted to know about. Thank you very much.